Hello, everybody, and welcome to this teacher presentation on how you can develop your classroom management skills. So today we're going to learn about different ways to strengthen classroom management skills in order to build relationships with students and increase productivity in the classroom. We want to have our students be focused, attentive, and on task at all times, or most of the time. So before we get started, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Kristen Muse. I have over 15 years experience working with upper elementary students in the area of science. I have a master's degree in literacy, and I also have 90 degrees above my master's, which is in science. In my free time, I live at home with my husband, and we have a furry child named Samson. And I like to take Samson for long walks around the neighborhood. I like to read. I am part of a book club that meets monthly, which I love to do. And I also love to go out to dinner when I can. So for those of you that are either new to teaching or maybe you just want a refresher, maybe the past year was a little difficult, so you are looking for some more strategies, we are going to go over all things classroom management today. So before we get started, we should tackle what is classroom management. And classroom management is basically having a set of skills and techniques that you as a teacher use to run your classroom without disruptive student behaviors. So you can have all the techniques, all the strategies in the world. However, there are outside factors that will impede and impact our classroom management skills. So we have students that are coming from every walk of life that we need to kind of gauge what they need and how we can best meet those needs. As teachers, we have our attitude towards teaching, and that is something that is within our control. Out of these three factors here, our attitude towards what we're doing in the classroom is probably the only thing that is in our control, although there are times when there are factors that are out of our control that do contribute to our attitude. And then the school environment. I am lucky enough to work in a school where we have a very supportive environment. My building administration is phenomenal. So that really helps to have a nice classroom management strategy and have things in place to be able to use. Okay, let me just move myself over here. Okay, that way I'm not in the way. So improving classroom management. As I said, nothing is foolproof. These are some of the strategies that I use in my classroom, but there are still students that you have where you're going to have to kind of just finagle and try to come up with additional tips and strategies because every class is different. Every child within that classroom is different. So I'm hoping that these 6 tips are going to help you start off the school year with a solid foundation. Maybe it's something that you haven't used before that it could help you to improve things when you go back to school. So for tip number 1, I think that all of these tips I'm going to say are very important, and they truly are. You want to create a respectful environment in your classroom. For each of these tips, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you the why you should do this and then some ideas on how you can do this. So you want to have a respectful classroom because the student behavior will likely to improve if there are fair procedures in place. Now, there are some exceptions to things being fair. There are certain rules where if there are any sort of IEP requirements, that may go above and beyond your rules. If you have a rule that the students cannot leave the classroom, but then you have a student that has an accommodation of having a motor breaks, that is something that is going to supersede your classroom rule. And, there may be instances where you may have to have a conversation with some students to say, we're all of us are different and some of us just have specific needs. That's why they need to break the rule that you have in the classroom. I feel like if you have these conversations with your students and let them know the reasons behind why you have to make certain decisions, not that you have to fully explain yourself on everything, But if there is something that the students really think is unfair and you explain the reasoning behind it, and sometimes letting them know this is out of my control, I feel that the students will begin to understand you a little bit better. So here are some ways that you can create a respectful environment. I like to have a warm, welcoming classroom, when COVID restrictions allow that. I know there is a lot of, I don't want to say controversy, but there's a lot of conversation that goes on, especially as the students get older, onto how you should have your classroom look. And I know that sometimes I go above and beyond with certain things, especially with having how I want things to look. And I don't necessarily think that everybody needs to do that. I know that we're all different. We all have different, things that are going on in our life outside of the classroom. But I do feel there is a difference for a student that walks into a classroom that is completely bare and has no personality at all, compared to one that has some warmth to it. So while I don't think you need to go overboard and I have a lot of color and a lot of things that are going on in my classroom, I do think students need to feel as if it's a place that you are happy to be in and that you are welcoming them into. So creating that type of environment, no matter how you decide to do it, I think will allow the students to know that you care about them and that you want to give them the best that you can. Other ways that you can create a respectful environment is I stop gossip of any kind. And this not only goes for gossip between student and student, but even if a student comes in and is complaining about a substitute teacher, a colleague, I stop that. I don't think that discussing colleagues should be something that is happening in the classroom. I really think that those conversations can really take a turn for the worse. However, if I do have a student that is having trouble with one of my colleagues, I will talk to them outside of the classroom, when it's more of a one-on-one conversation. I don't like when any of those conversations become a class conversation, because I feel like it becomes a bashing incident, and I would never want to be, one where people are talking about me in that way. Another way that you can create a respectful environment is to build social emotional learning activities into your classroom. I think that this is going to be something that's going to be more predominant in the classrooms, especially after coming back from a COVID era where there was so much alone time and loneliness. Now building those relationships back together, having those face-to-face communications, I think are very important. Even saying something as simple as when a student is absent and just, I missed you, where were you? I think just adding words like that just give students just a little bit more of a bounce in the step, knowing that there is somebody that cares about them in the school. There are certain rules that should be for everybody. Again, IEP requirements would dictate otherwise. But, if you don't allow hats in your classroom and you're allowing one student to wear it, but then you're yelling at another student that they shouldn't be wearing it, that's where an unfair perception is going to take place. So when you have rules for hats, latenesses, etc., you want to really kind of across the board treat all of the students in the same manner. And I also think giving positive communication home, not just negative communication, really inspires students at any age, even as the older that they get. Just a quick email. I don't call home as often as I probably should. I use email more often to communicate with parents, but sending a quick email, so-and-so had a great class period today. They were raising their hand, participating, I think really goes a long way with the students and with the parents, which is very helpful. My second tip is to have clear expectations. So this is something that when you start the beginning of the school year, you want your students to know what you are expecting of them. Why do you want to do this? Because when the students know what is expected of them, then they understand this is the way I need to be acting in this class, and this is what I need to be doing. So from everything from the do now, from when they first walk into the classroom, of having something for them to get started on, or at least opening up so that they're ready when class begins, to letting them know the different rules in the classroom. Having all those expectations outlined for them will alleviate problems in the future. So how can you do this? I like to present information both visually and auditorily. So I will have a do now on the board. I will also tell them, we have to wait outside in the hallway as they're entering. I'll also tell them, this is what you need to do when you go into the classroom. That way they're getting that in two different modalities so that hopefully they will be able to listen and they will be able to have that completed by the time that you walk into the classroom. I also like to start the year with a syllabus, and that syllabus outlines the expectations. Now, the students are often bombarded, especially if you're departmentalized, they're bombarded with the syllabus and all of the rules, all of the expectations. So it is something that in the beginning of the year, not just the first day of school, you want to continually go over until they get the hang of it. And then even throughout the year, you're going to have to continue to go over that because there's certain times of the year, I feel like December, March, and May, where they, start to forget what they're supposed to be doing. So you want to make sure you're revisiting those throughout the year and really praise positive behaviors. I think trying to focus more on what the students are doing correctly as opposed to what they're not doing correctly really does make a difference. I'm not saying that I am able to do that all of the time, but when you can, focusing on, oh, look, Johnny has all of the materials out so that we can get started. That's really great. And that makes me happy. Saying things like that can spark a lot of the other kids to then follow and do the right thing. Number 3 is to be consistent. You want to have your procedures so that the students know, okay, this is what we're doing. Having that structured environment will really help, again, your students know and expect how they need to be acting. I think that this also will help your classroom when you're not there. They should hope, well, we all know when a substitute is not in there, they're going to try to get away with what they can get away with. However, you're going to have your students that will know this is what we're supposed to be doing. So if you start your classroom in a certain manner and you're always starting it that way, it leaves less plans that you need to leave for the sub because the students should be in that routine. So some ways that you can do that are to think about the classroom procedures that you want to set up before school starts. Think about those rules. What do you want the students to be able to do? Or how should they be going to the bathroom? Are there certain passes that they need to have? Are there certain times of the day that you want them to be able to go? Think about that ahead of time so that when you're making up your syllabus and it's those first days of school, you have them already laid out. And then you can share that information with the students and you're kind of not going on the fly because then sometimes you're like, oh, wait, you know what? That's not good. And then you want to model, repeat, model, repeat, model, repeat. As I said, you're going to have those times throughout the year where the students are going to start to forget what they need to be doing. So you need to constantly be going over this. But having that consistency in place should hopefully allow you to not have to go over it as often. Some other things that you want to think about aside from like passes and things like that. How do you want your classroom to be organized? If you are departmentalized and you're a science teacher, where are you putting the lab materials that the students will have to take? What are students going to do when they're absent? Are you going to have, I have like an accordion folder that I hang up and it has the days of the week and I put the papers in there and I tell them that's where you need to go to get the materials that you're missing. You want to have these procedures ahead of time, as I said, but these are some other things that you may not think about over the summer as you're trying to relax for the next school year. I really do like to have an aim and a do now. The students really don't pay too much attention to the aim. That's kind of more just for administration or for myself, but to have the do now, and sometimes even just having it something as simple as open up to, yesterday's assignment. Maybe not so much, especially in the beginning of the year, having them do an assignment independently, but just knowing that they're ready to go when you are ready to go really is very helpful because you're not wasting any time. Tip number 4 is engagement. And I think as science teachers, I think that this is an area that we kind of have down already because most of us are able to do some sort of lab activity to tie in the concepts that we're teaching, which automatically engages the students. But a reason why you want to engage your students is because we want to have fun. We don't all want to sit, myself included. I don't want to sit there day after day just lecturing to my students. Being able to walk around the room and watching them collaborate with one another and working together and being able to use hands-on material makes learning and the day go so much faster. And those are the experiences that your students are going to remember. So whenever I can, I try to make things hands-on. I think for me, I know that is the best way that I learn. So I feel the same is going to be for my students. However, I also like to bring in technology if I can. There are some things that I may not have the materials for, and I can, bring up a video or a demonstration or a simulation from the internet to show my students. That is really going to be cool too. And then further, I like to break out crayons, color pencils, and have them color and, make diagrams and things like that. There's a lot of evidence that says that coloring and drawing, no matter what your ability is, but doing activities like that are using both sides of the brain, so the students are able to make more connections to the material that they're learning, and then hopefully, in turn, they will remember it. Collaboration, I also think, is key. And I think collaboration is key because there are several things that you can do for a collaboration. Having your students work together will sometimes allow those weaker students to learn from the students that are understanding that concept a little bit better. They tend to like to learn from their peers whenever possible. I also think they may ask their peers questions, and if that one peer that's a little bit stronger, a little bit higher, if they don't know the answer, they sometimes are a little bit more comfortable in asking you for the information. And I also think this is important because we get bored of each other. I think about our faculty meetings. We don't want to hear the same person speak the entire time. We don't want to be there to begin with. So now when we're hearing the same person speak the entire time, it's really droning on and on. But when you have that time to work with others, it does make the time go faster. So some ways to do this, you may want to allow them to choose their own groups. I usually start out the first couple days. I like to really engage them with different activities the first couple days. And at that point, I will let them choose their own groups. And I really hit home with, I'm letting you choose your own groups right now. And this is going to let me know moving forward whether or not I'm going to be able to do that. So doing something like that, I don't have to worry as much about the behaviors because they want to have that ability to be able to choose who they want to work with. So, and it's also the beginning of the school year, so you usually don't see those disruptive behaviors just yet. So doing that in the beginning of the school year has helped me out in not having to worry about those other things that may go on. But I also will randomize groups throughout the year. I don't just always let them come up with their own groups because a lot of times they're just going to work with the same students over and over again. So sometimes I may want to randomize the group based on their ability or their behavior. And that's one way that you can kind of minimize any behavior problems that are going on when they're collaborating. And for assignments like that, you may want to consider using a rubric. That way you can better assess who is doing what, and it's not that they're all just learning based off of this one person. I find that does come in handy. And then my last tip for you are consequences. Every choice that we make has a consequence. Sometimes we have good consequences, and then sometimes there are consequences that are not so good. I remind my students, sometimes they'll be joking, what if I cut your class? What if I just decide to walk out of class? And I remind them that we have choices in every single thing that we do. It's just, you have to understand that from that choice, there is a consequence. If you decide to just walk out of the room, well, then your parents are going to know, and so is the principal, and there will be a consequence. If you stay in the classroom, you won't get in trouble in that aspect, but maybe you will be bored to tears, as sometimes they want to pretend. But I find having those real life conversations with them and letting them know you have choices here. You don't have to do this, but if you don't do this, this is what is going to happen. And kind of outlining that conversation and letting them know what the effects are going to be from their behavior sometimes will keep them in line. Again, this is all depending on the student. There are some students that you can have a conversation about this with that are a lot more rational than other students. But I do find this is something that does help de-escalate certain behaviors in the classroom. Now, first and foremost, we always have to make sure that we are following the school guidelines. If the school has rules in place, you need to follow those. If you don't, you are going to have your own consequences with administration. But again, I like to, when I'm going over my expectations, to have those consequences on the first day of school so the students know them. If you're not doing your work, I'm going to have to call your parents, things like that. A lot of this is outlined in our school code of conduct, but the students sign it, but they're not reading it. So I feel like that's why you need to have a visual and an auditory way of getting your message to the students. And you want to follow through with your consequences. If you tell the students this, A is going to happen if you don't do this, then you need to follow through with your consequence. But you do want to avoid having some sort of a power struggle in the classroom. If there's something where I will bring certain students out into the hallway so that there are, just to kind of de-escalate things. And it also, sometimes if you have to give a student a consequence, they're embarrassed. And then that's why they're going to have certain behaviors, because they want to show their power to the other students and get over their embarrassment. So a lot of times if I am instilling any sort of a consequence, hey, let's take a walk into the hallway and then we'll have a conversation. I may wait till the end of class time to do this with certain students, just to also avoid that power struggle and the negative effects that they may have on the class for the remainder of the time that they are in there. And then along with those consequences, build in some positive rewards. If you see students that are always working hard, always doing what they're doing, you know what? Here's a homework pass. Giving students some incentives like that, will really, I think, also allow for them to want to work harder and want to follow the rules in your classroom. So I don't have any classroom management resources. I do have a blog post that I will give you in a follow-up email for this. But I hope that these 6 tips really will help you and that they are going to allow you to have a smoother school year. So I really do thank you for taking the time to learn a little bit more about classroom management. If you have any questions, you can feel free to email me at kristen@teachingmuse.com. And I will be sending a follow-up email. It will have the 6 tips in here that are outlined, because again, sometimes we learn better if we have the information auditorily, but then I will also give it to you so that you will have it visually. You can also visit my blog, and that is at teachingmuse.com. And while I don't really have anything specific for classroom management resources in my Teachers Pay Teachers store, if you want engaging activities for science, you can always check that out there. So again, I hope that this has helped you. If you have any questions, if you need me to elaborate on anything further, you can email me and I will get back to you as soon as I can. Have a great summer.